Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us live today. For those who couldn't attend, don't worry, a recording will be sent out afterwards, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. Welcome to our virtual workshop on repurposing invasive plants. My name is Brittany Eliadis, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager with the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council. As people trickle in, if you can put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat, that would be amazing. I'll also ask everyone to remain on mute and cameras off for this webinar. I've also noticed that people joining us have a lot of Megan's name showing up. If you can rename yourself on the chat on the Zoom by clicking the three dots above your name. There's an option there to rename yourself. I apologize for this happening. I'm not sure, there must have been a mistake in the Zoom scheduling. I'll give you all a moment to do that. Wonderful. Before we start, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are learning together today on the ancestral unceded territory of the Ktunaxa and Swepnik people and the chosen land of Métis people. I am deeply grateful to be able to live, work, and play on this land. My job with EKISC allows me to travel around the East Kootenays and see the beauty that has been preserved through time. I moved to Kimberley 2 months ago, and I have made a home here, but I do not take this land for granted. I work towards reconciliation by working together with the Ktunaxa and Swepnik people to protect the native ecosystems and learn the history of the land I have the privilege of being on. As some of you may already know, and welcome to those who are new, this is the third webinar in our Repurposing Invasive Plant series. If you'd like to discover the power of medicinal and edible invasive plants, or learn how to craft tinctures and salves, those recordings are available on the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society and the Columbia Invasive Species Society YouTube channels. We encourage you to check them out after today's session. We're excited to be joined today by guest artist Jane Kramer, whose creative work explores environmental and social issues. Her current projects are rooted in the idea of giving new life to the unwanted, and that includes invasive plants. Here's what to expect from today's workshop. We'll start with a quick overview of who EKISC is and the work we do. Then we'll jump into a bit of Invasive Species 101, what they are, how they spread, and why they matter. Next, we'll touch on some best management practices and how to properly dispose of invasive plants to avoid further spread. And finally, we'll hand things over to Jane, who will show us how these plants can be repurposed into meaningful, creative, and functional products. If at any point you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. I have some colleagues online as well that will be able to answer some questions, and we'll be able to send out an email with Q&As afterwards as well. Okay, the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council, or EKISC, is a regional nonprofit organization dedicated to mitigating the environmental, social, and economic impacts of invasive species. Our work supports healthy ecosystems, resilient communities, and sustainable land use across the East Kootenay regions. EKISC consists of a cross-section of stakeholders who are united in their efforts to effectively manage invasive species across the region. EKISC is guided by a 9-member board of directors who represents a diverse range of stakeholders, including industry, recreation, government, agriculture, and the nonprofit sector, all united by a shared goal, protecting the East Kootenays from invasive species. We're currently seeking new board members. Our annual general meeting is actually on September 16th this year. And if you're interested in being part of this incredible team, you can visit our website to learn more. All right, behind the scenes, EKISC has a passionate and dynamic team working across several departments. Katie and Megan support us in In administration, keeping everything running smoothly. Gabriella is our project development and program support specialists. In the field department, we have Connor, who manages internal work plans, while Ashley coordinates with contractors and oversees external work. And I'm the education and outreach manager, focusing on public education, event delivery, and outreach funding. Each summer, EKISC brings on a team of enthusiastic students to support our education and fieldwork. I'm lucky to have Alyssa and Cassidy on the education crew this summer. You've probably seen them at farmers markets, parks, libraries, summer camps, and more, spreading awareness and engagement across our communities. Meanwhile, Samantha and Sarah are out in the field contributing to the on-the-ground efforts to monitor and manage invasive species. Our work wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our funding partners. We're proud to collaborate with First Nations, conservation organizations, government agencies, local stakeholders, and the public to help preserve the diverse ecosystems of the East Kootenays. We currently receive support from 35 funders, including Columbia Basin Trust, who made this entire webinar series possible. Thanks to their contributions, we're able to deliver education and work with land managers to coordinate invasive species management at a landscape level. What is an invasive species? This is one of the most common questions we get. An invasive species is an organism that has been introduced into an ecosystem where it doesn't naturally occur. But here's the key. Not all introduced species are invasive. To be classified as invasive, a species must cause harm to the economy, the environment, or society. Economically, invasive species can drive up cost through increased wildfire fuel loads, higher taxes, or expensive control efforts. Environmentally, they're a leading cause of biodiversity loss, second only to habitat destruction. For example, invasive plants like knapweed can negatively impact native wildlife like the western painted turtle. Socially, they affect human health and enjoyment. So like the giant hogweed, for example, is phototoxic and dangerous to touch. So others overtake trails and campsites, making outdoor spaces less accessible and enjoyable. To keep things clear, let's define a few terms we use a lot in this work. Native species. These are species that evolved here and are essential to local ecosystems. You've likely seen native plants providing food and shelter for wildlife and helping to maintain healthy habitats. Introduced or non-native species. These species are brought into an area where they don't naturally occur, but not all of them are invasive. Remember, to be invasive, a species must be from away and causing harm to the economy and environment or society. Weeds, simply put, a weed is any plant that's considered undesirable or growing where it's not wanted. That could be native or non-native. So it's time to test your knowledge with a quick game here. I'll show you a picture and you'll type the number in the chat that best fits. So you'll chat in the chat, press 1, hit 1 if it's native and invasive, 2 if it's non-native and invasive, 3 if it's native and non-invasive, and 4 if it's non-native and non-invasive. So let's just see if there's any questions before we go. Okay. All right. So black henbane. In the chat, you can put if it's from here and invasive, from here and from away and invasive, from here and non-invasive, or from away and non-invasive. So that is correct. That's non-native and invasive. Next, we have the common lilac. One, two, three, or four. It is non-native, but non-invasive. Next, we have some yarrow. All right. This one's native to BC and non-invasive, so it's a great in gardens. Next up, we have spotted knapweed. This one you see a lot everywhere. Definitely non-native and invasive. Next up, we've got the mountain pine beetle. Could be a tricky one here. Technically native to BC, but often considered invasive because of its massive ecological impact. Next up, we've got some fireweed. Fireweed is in fact native and non-invasive. And finally, we've got some dandelion. Fun one. Dandelion is non-native and non-invasive, so most people just call this a weed, actually. Now, you might be wondering, what do invasive plants have in common? Let's take a look at the key traits that give them a competitive edge. So, first off, we got some lack of natural predators, pathogens, and diseases. In their native ranges, these plants might be kept in check by insects, fungi, or animals, but once introduced here, they often escape those natural controls, giving them an unfair advantage. They can be quick to establish and thrive. So invasive species are opportunistic. They grow fast, spread easily, and often form monocultures, growing out of crowding out native plants and reducing biodiversity. Prolific, they could be prolific producers and reproducers, whether through seeds, root fragments, or runners. These plants know how to multiply and fast. Some can reproduce both sexually and asexually, doubling their chances. Seeds can remain viable for many years. Some invasive plant seeds can sit in the soil for decades and still germinate when conditions are right, making them incredibly difficult to eradicate. Phenotype, typic plasticity. This fancy term means they can adapt to a wide range of conditions, so different soils, moisture levels, sun exposure, and more. So they're flexible survivors. We've got allelopathic traits as well. Some species release chemical compounds into the soil that inhibit the growth of other plants. Essentially, um, yeah, prohibit. Longer photosynthesis periods. Many invasive plants begin growing earlier in the spring and hang on later into the fall, giving them a longer season to store energy and outcompete native species. So now this is only a handful of characteristics of our native plants. Now, you might be wondering how I'm supposed to remember all of this. A totally valid question. With so many plants and different reproduction strategies, it can feel overwhelming. But the good news is you don't have to memorize it all. There are amazing and trustworthy resources available to help. The ones you see here are all free to download from our website, and you have to check out the apps. We're also new to the iNaturalist app as well. So whether you're identifying a plant, learning how it spreads, or looking for tips on proper disposal, these guides are great places to start. How did invasive species get here? Any guesses? Feel free to throw your ideas in the chat. The short answer is people. Most invasive species were brought here either intentionally or accidentally, either from Europe, Asia, or other parts of the world. Some were brought over as ornamental plants and escaped garden settings. Others hitched rides in shipping materials, water, or contaminated seed mixes. And many are spread by us every day on our boats, bike tires, pet fur, vehicles, boots, and other gear. So even the tiny seeds can travel long distances and take root in wild places. This is why prevention is key. Here are a few simple actions that make a big difference. Play clean go. Before leaving a trail or site, brush off your boots, gear, and your pets. We've got clean, drain, dry, rinse and dry watercraft and equipment after every use to prevent aquatic invasives. This is super important right now. Use PlantWise. Choose non-invasive and native alternatives for your gardens and landscaping. You can report invasive species using mobile apps and government websites. Many are listed in our resource section. And most importantly, educate others. Talk about invasive species and share what you learn. As we saw earlier, invasive species have traits that allow them to spread fast and dominate, so prevention and awareness are powerful tools. There is no silver bullet, when it comes to managing invasive species, but there are 4 main strategies we rely on, depending on the plant species, the location, and the goals of the site. So let's walk through each one. First up, we've got mechanical control. This means physically removing the plant. Things like digging, mowing, and hand pulling. It's especially effective on species that have taproot or that don't spread vegetatively, meaning they don't grow back from the root fragments. We often use mechanical methods in riparian areas, public parks, or other sensitive environments where herbicides aren't a good option. But it's important to follow up. A single pull usually isn't enough, especially with aggressive plants, and we do need to make sure to reseed because invasive plants do love disturbed areas. Next is cultural control. This method uses land use practices like grazing, replanting, and ecosystem restoration to give native plants a better chance to thrive. For example, livestock might be used to graze down certain invasives, or we might reseed a disturbed area with native grasses after a removal project. Cultural controls work best when they're combined with other methods, so they're part of a long-term holistic strategy. Third is a chemical control. This involves using herbicide, but it's not a free-for-all. Herbicide are often species-specific, meaning we select the right compound and apply it carefully based on the plant's biology and the environment. When used correctly and by trained professionals, herbicide can be one of the most effective and efficient ways to manage large infestations. And finally, we've got biological control, biocontrol, sorry. This is when we introduce a natural enemy of the invasive species, like an insect or fungus, from the plant's native range. The goal of biocontrol isn't to wipe the plant out completely, but to reduce its population and spread over time. These agents go through years of testing to make sure they won't harm native plants, crops, or animals. Biocontrol is essentially especially useful for large, hard-to-reach infestations where mechanical or chemical treatments aren't practical. So to recap, mechanical, cultural, chemical, and biocontrol, each tool plays a role in integrated invasive species management, and often the best result comes when we combine multiple strategies. All right, now let's quickly go touch on something really important: disposal. In BC, there are 4 main methods for disposing of invasive materials: landfilling, burial, industrial incineration, and composting, though this one is rarely appropriate for invasive species. But here's the catch: not all of these options are available in every region. Here in the East Kootenays, the proper method is to bag your invasive plants and take them to the landfill. So wherever you're located, it's important to check with your local municipality or regional district to find out what disposal methods are available and which are safe and appropriate for invasive plants. Making the responsible choice at the end of your weed pulling efforts is just as important as removing the plant in the first place. All right, let's wrap things up with some positive action. Planting native. We've pulled together a few great resources on native seeds and plants, including region-specific suggestions and sourcing tips. These are all available on our website. If you're joining us from outside the East Kootenays, I really encourage you to do a little digging, pun intended, into nurseries and seed suppliers in your area that focuses on native plants. Choosing native not only supports biodiversity, but it helps you resist future invasions by filling in ecological gaps. As we mentioned earlier, this is part 3 in a 3-part series, and we're thrilled to end with such a unique and inspiring guest. Jane is a fine art and documentary photographer whose work explores connections between people, plants, and places. Her current project, called Foreshadowing: Endangered and Threatened Plant Species, combines art, ecology, and activism in a truly beautiful way. For this series, Jane photographs the shadows of endangered and threatened plant species in Michigan. She then transfers those images onto paper she makes by hand from invasive plant species. Even her frames are made from reclaimed wood. So Jane holds a degree in anthropology from the University of Minnesota and trained in photography at the Rocky Mountain School of Photography in Montana. She's received several awards, including the Chris Clark Fellowship from the Arts Council of Greater Lansing, and has exhibited internationally through Art from the Lakes, a cultural exchange between Japan and Michigan. So we're honored to have her with us today to show how invasive species can be transformed into meaningful, thought-provoking art. Thank you, Jane.
Oh, thank you, Brittany. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can. Let's make sure everyone else can, if some people can plop things into.
Yeah, all good on my end.
Perfect.
Okay, and then I just want to make sure I can see my notes. Okay, can you still see my screen but not my notes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yay, it's working. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's 9 p.m. or almost 9:30 here, so it's a little bit later, but I'm still awake, and that's a good thing, and I'm excited to be here. I just want to start with a quick question. Has anyone made paper from plants before? If you have, put a little note in the chat and I'll check it at the end. It's great to connect with other paper makers. So as Brittany mentioned, I'm a visual artist, photographer. I use photography as a starting point. My practice is really rooted in curiosity and finding meaning in things that are often discarded or overlooked. And I believe art is a great way for us to create and inspire meaning and emotion. And I believe that it exists in all of us. So just really quickly, I started getting into photography or enjoying and admiring photography when I was in middle school, and I picked this poster from my bedroom. I didn't know anything about photography or Ansel Adams, but this poster stuck with me through middle school, high school, college, and into my early adult life. And it was really my first intro to photography. I then discovered the work of Jim Brandenburg from Minnesota. His images were just kind of magical to me. He took photographs that didn't look like photographs without the use of Photoshop. He passed away this past year, but I just am really grateful for his inspiration. Because when I took my first photo class, I went out and took pictures of nature because of that first poster and Jim Brandenburg and other photographers like them. So this was one of the pictures I first took in the middle of winter in Minnesota during my first class. I was instantly drawn to flowers, and then over the years just started taking pictures of different plants and studying texture and depth of field. Just kind of for fun. I also played around with shadows and reflections, but none of it really had any direction or meaning. But when I was working at a local gallery here, we had Japanese artists come over and lead workshops, and they showed their work at the gallery. And then in return, they were looking for Michigan artists to go to Japan and do the same. And they were going to have an exhibition called an exhibition on the theme of nature in Michigan. So I saw this as a great opportunity to study nature photography and my plant work more deeply and to find a purpose for it. So I decided to apply, and most of my best ideas come when I'm applying for grant money, and especially when there's international travel involved, because we would go with the exhibit when the project was done. So I put together a proposal, and I knew I wanted to do something, with plants, and especially plants that were native to Michigan. And so I started thinking about what kind of materials I would use. And normally I print on paper made from Japan, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted everything about the final piece to be made in Michigan. So I was thinking about what could I do? Could I make my own paper? If I did that, what kind of plant would I use or should I use? And I was thinking about this out loud. And then my husband, he's a conservation biologist at Michigan State University. He just blurted out, invasive plant species. I'm like, of course, what a great idea. I wish it had been mine, but it was his. And just like that, the whole project took shape. So it became a way for me to explore the complex relationship between endangered plant species and invasive plant species, and make that more tangible and accessible to the viewer. So I decided to photograph the shadows of the plants, endangered plant species, so that I could continue my study of shadows. But it also felt like a fitting metaphor because shadows really speak to the difficulty of finding endangered plant species in the wild. And then, even though I had never made paper before, I watched these two middle school girls on YouTube making it. And I thought, well, if they can do that, I probably can too. So I also didn't know how I was going to get my shadow image on the paper, but I figured, I'll figure that out later. So I submitted the proposal and I titled it Foreshadowing, which I also thought carried many layers of meaning. So it was accepted. I went through this period of experimentation and frustration. And then in the end, I sent off 10 prints to Japan for the exhibit. And so it's just been a great project. That was in 2014. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is just the different steps of this process, which includes the paper making. So the most important thing that I had to learn first was that I had to learn about invasive plant species, how to harvest them, and then of course how to make paper. But I also had to get the proper permits and to possess some of the species. And then I did a lot of just outreach to nature centers and people that study plants to help me identify the species and find them, and just use the resources I could in the community. There's also something called the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, and that was very useful for learning about how to harvest each species. So I knew that if I was going to do this project, I had to do it without creating more damage or spreading more of the seeds. So I just had to be really careful about that. So the next thing I did is start harvesting plant species. So far I've harvested 18 different species, and garlic mustard, which is pictured here, is by far my favorite because it's easy to process and pick, and it makes beautiful paper. And I usually pick it before it goes to seed so that there's no risk of spreading the seeds. And I got my son to help me. This is many years ago. He's now 22 years old, so it's been a while. But I also like to use reed canary grass and Phragmites. I can collect them any time of year, which is really nice. And reed canary grass is easy to work with and process, and it makes good paper. Phragmites, on the other hand, is really impossible to, well, I shouldn't say impossible. It's just very difficult to cut, and it takes a long time to process, which I'll go into a little bit more in a minute. But they both produce really nice, strong paper. And so several years ago, I also participated in an artist residency at Michigan State University's biological station. And if you don't know what artist residency is, it basically just gives artists an opportunity to work and live in a new environment and connect with other people, to collaborate on art projects, or to learn from each other. So the biological station is a field research site, and so there are faculty and graduate students there doing research and educational programs. So it was the perfect place to do the residency. At the time, they didn't have a residency program, but I reached out, explained what my goal was, collecting invasive plant species and possibly photographing a plant. And then they agreed to collaborate. So I stayed there a few different times. They provided food and lodging, which was great. And I met with one of the PhD students you can see here, and we harvested 7 plant species, 2 of which are shown here on the slide. And I also photographed bulrush sedge, that's hard to say. And I also led a paper making workshop for K through 12 science teachers. So it was like a very productive residency, and I learned a lot. It was a great experience. And also they established an artist residency program after that. So that was really exciting. During that residency, we also collected spotted knapweed and Dame's rocket, and as well as purple loosestrife and Eurasian water milfoil. the water milfoil had been collected 2 weeks prior to my visit. So that's why it looks just horrific. And the smell was even worse. That is the only aquatic plant I've made paper from so far. And I'll show you that paper in just a little bit. And then we also collected Oriental Bittersweet, which was literally growing just 5 feet from the door of the research center. So that was not hard to find. And there was plenty of it. After that experience, I also connected with the curator at the garden at MSU. I'll say MSU so I don't have to keep saying Michigan State University, but and he issued me a permit so we could go onto some of the campus property and collect black swallowwort, which is on the right. So all these connections were so great, and I love going out with people that actually study these species and know where to find them and know how to handle them, and it's just the best way to do it, and I feel most comfortable doing that. So through the curator, I was also connected with other garden staff who helped me harvest common buckthorn along the river on campus. And unfortunately, buckthorn was the first plant that I tried to make paper from. And I spent a whole week using a pocket knife and, peeling off these little strips that you can see in the upper right-hand corner. And then after I did that, I had to peel the outer bark from the inner bark. And I ended up with only a bucket full of plant material. And it just was horrible. And I kept thinking, what have I gotten myself into? But after that, I learned that there's an easy way to do it. If you soak the whole, branch in a bucket of water, then the bark just peels off really easily. So, live and learn. It's all an experimental process. So, and then a little bit later, well, actually, during the pandemic in 2020, I did another artist residency on Mackinac Island, which if you've never been to Mackinac Island, it's definitely worth a trip. It's such a unique place, and it's so beautiful. So for 2 weeks, I stayed there in the visitor center, and the goal of those 2 weeks was to make a site-specific print. So I wanted to photograph an endangered plant species and collect the invasive species to make paper so that it would all be, material from the island. What made this especially challenging was that there are no cars allowed on the island. So I had to do all of that by bicycle. So I just spent hours biking all around the island, collecting my species. And they weren't hard to find, actually. They were all over the island. Spotted knapweed was along many parts of the bike path. The bike path goes all around the island. So it was just everywhere. We also found golden lungwort and wild parsnip and common St. John's wort, as well as common periwinkle, which actually was quite pretty. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but it was pretty. And then wall lettuce, which I had not been aware of before that. So there was plenty to pick from, and then also lily of the valley. And in a little bit, I'll tell you which plant I used for my final print. So the third step in the process, just want to check the time, was actually making the paper. And you can make paper from any plant, actually, just not endangered plants, please. And then you also want to make sure that the plants used are not poisonous. And of course, that you get the permits that are required and that you know how to harvest and dispose of the waste. And I heard Brittany talking about disposing of the waste in the public trash, which is what I was told to do with my waste. So that's what I do. So after the plants are collected, I cut them into 1/2 inch to 1 inch pieces. And you can do this right when you pick them or after they've dried. I like to cut them fresh because I'm usually cutting off the seed heads, blooms, and the roots. So it's just easier to do it then. If you're not going to boil it right away or use it right away, you can store it in a paper bag. Just make sure that you shake it every few days at first. And I usually switch out the bag because it becomes a little bit damp. So I've had some of my plant material in paper bags for 10 years now. So it works pretty well. You then boil the plant material in a stainless steel pot. I use 5-gallon pot, and then I use a tablespoon of soda ash. And the ash removes the linen, sugars, starches, waxes, and gums from the cellulose fiber. And this makes it stronger and archival. I've never made paper without using soda ash, so I don't know what that would look like. I had someone ask me that once. I'm like, I don't know. But it typically takes 2 to 4 hours to boil, except if it's Phragmites, and then it can take sometimes 2 to 3 different times boiling for 2 to 4 hours. So, and you just boil it until the stems are soft and they bend, but you don't want it to be mushy or slimy. Oh, and then I forgot a step. You also, after it boils, you rinse it until the water is clear and all the soap is gone. So the next step is then to grind the fibers to break down the cellulose. And this is a picture of my friend Karen. She has a $8,000 Hollander beater, which is just like the holy grail of all beaters, paper beaters. And that grinds the biomass into this beautiful fine pulp. I mean, it's just a beast, and it just takes an hour. If I had room and money, I would get one of those. But this is my much cheaper version made by KitchenAid. It doesn't break down the cellulose like the Hollander beater does, but it works well enough for my project, and I can travel with it. So it's just easy to use. I've also used a mortar and pestle for tougher plants like Phragmites, but only if I'm like really desperate because it's, hard on the joints. But and I should note, if you use a blender for paper making, do not use it also for your pesto and food prep. You want different blenders. Okay, so instead of trying to describe how to make paper, I will show you if the video is working. I don't see it. Oh, shoot. Okay, sometimes it doesn't work. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, well, maybe I can pass along the video to Brittany. So the idea is that, I'm so sorry it's not there. I have a vat of water, that I put the pulp into. And then I have something here called a mold and decal. And I put it together like a picture frame. It's just one side has a screen and the other one is like an empty picture frame. Put it on top of each other. And then I dip it in the water and I pull it up. And so the water is draining out. And you just have this film of paper, which on the left you can see the film of paper. And then you just take off the top part and you have your paper. And then you flip it over on a piece of cotton fabric. And then you just put another piece of cotton fabric on top of that. And then you just keep making sandwiches of 2 pieces of cotton fabric with a piece of paper between them. So I'm really sorry the video didn't work. I don't know why that happened. So after that, you take your paper sandwich and you put it in a paper press. So the more time that your paper is pressed, the stronger it will be. And the more pressure, the stronger it will be. So this is my friend Karen's paper press, and it's a beautiful thing. And this is my paper press. I have a wood board and 3 20-pound weights, and then I stand on it for about 10 minutes, or as long as I can before I get bored. And again, it's easy to take it with me when I'm doing workshops or traveling. I did have another one gifted to me, which is a little bit more robust, but this one's kind of fun. So after the paper has been pressed, you peel back one side of the fabric, and then you lay it paper face down onto a table. So this is a wood table, but I have a piece of flexi board over it to protect the table. And then I usually put on newspaper on top of it just to kind of weight it down so it doesn't get wavy. I switch out the newspaper once a day, and probably depending on humidity, it dries after 1 to 3 days. But you can tell when it's dry because the cloth will be dry. And people do this many different ways. This is just one way to do it. But when it's done, then you kind of tug on the edges of the fabric, and that kind of releases it from the paper. And you just, or the paper, from the fabric. And then you just peel back the fabric. So when it works, it's a beautiful thing. And you get this beautiful, fine paper. This paper that you see, the garlic mustard, I used the Hollander beater for this. So it came out super smooth, and it was just really pretty. But if you're using a KitchenAid blender, it doesn't always work so well. And I like to share this picture. It's the first piece of paper I ever tried to make, and it was just hilarious. It was, this is Phragmites, of course, which was the worst one to use for my maiden voyage. But my husband told me it looked like a doormat, which is true. But I just didn't beat it long enough, or maybe it just needed a Hollander beater. So, but I didn't give up. I carried on, and over time my paper got better. One thing I learned is just that you just never know what you're going to get, even when you're using the same species of plant. There's just so much variation in color, texture, and strength. And you can see there's 2 pieces of garlic mustard here on the left. One was from northern Michigan, and one was from a nature center just a few miles away. And I've been trying to figure out what is the difference? Why is one green, one is brown? They just have a different texture, texture, I was gonna say. So I've tried to keep notes to see some kind of pattern, but so far I haven't figured it out. But I have talked to different plant experts, and they say, well, maybe it has something to do with the maturity of the plant, how established it is in its habitat, the amount of sunlight and water it gets, and what time of year you harvest it. So that could be. I just haven't figured it out yet. And let's see. So here's 3 others: spotted knapweed, black swallowwort, and Dame's rocket. Also make nice paper. And so did wild parsnip. But lily of the valley and wall hawkweed were not so great. They were kind of thin and brittle. It's like there just wasn't enough there. And of course, I had some complete bombers too. That the far left is the aquatic plant. Was more like seaweed, and it just was crunchy and fell apart. Japanese knotweed wasn't much better. And then I did make, the paper from Phragmites, but I didn't like the color, and it was brittle. So I didn't do that. Purple loosestrife was also too dark for my project, so I didn't use it. And Oriental bittersweet didn't stay together for me. So, I'll just keep moving on and find other plants. The other step of my project, which I won't get into too much, is just photographing the shadows of endangered and threatened plant species. I use a whiteboard. This first picture I took at a nursery, so I was able to get up close to it, and he had a lot of them, so I didn't feel bad touching it, turning it, whatever. But that's the only plant I photographed in a controlled environment. Otherwise, I'm out on nature preserves. The shadows are hard to photograph. I have to deal with not enough sun or wind or insects or clouds, or not touching the plant, not getting too close, looking where I'm walking. Again, I like to go out with people that know what they're doing and can help me find them and just be aware of my surroundings. So, so far I've photographed 50 of the species from these 4 categories. And it's just been a really fun adventure, this whole project. It's just, I could keep doing it forever, and I probably will. I don't always find the species I'm looking for, but getting back to the Mackinac Island residency, my plan was to photograph one of these 7 species, and I couldn't find them. The person that was supposed to help me wasn't able to come. And so after, biking and walking around for 2 weeks, I just didn't find them. So maybe they weren't there, or I wasn't looking in the right spot. I don't know. But after I talked to some of the park staff, I just decided to photograph native northern maidenhair fern, which is becoming harder to find. So this experience just taught me that you should always have a plan B, and I'll show you the print in just a second. So getting close to the last step here, what I do is I take the image into Photoshop and I remove the background and I make it a transparent background. And then I print it on this special transparency film, which I buy from Das Art. It's a woman that created this film specifically for alcohol gel transfers. And the best thing about the alcohol transfer is you don't need many supplies, and they're all very cheap. So you need, well, I shouldn't say it. Transparency film's not exactly cheap, but you need paper, a brayer, print shield to keep the ink from bleeding through the paper. You just spray it on one side or both sides. And then Purell hand sanitizer. Who knew that hand sanitizer could be so much fun? So basically what you do is you take your transparency film. Well, first you put hand sanitizer on the paper, then use a brayer to roll it out. You wear gloves so that the heat from your hands doesn't activate the alcohol right away. And then you lay the transparency ink side down and use the brayer to roll the ink from the back, and then it activates and releases the ink onto the paper. And so then you roll back the transparency film, and 50% of the time it works and you have a great print. And then the other 50% of the time it doesn't work and you just can't figure out what the heck is going on. But when it does work, it's such a great thing. Some plants work great for paper, some don't, like I said, but some plants work great for transfers and some don't. And I think maybe some of the plants are too hairy or woody or waxy, or they have more linen in them, which makes them more water resistant. I just don't know. But these plants didn't work well for the ink, so I couldn't use them for my project. But when that happens, I just, when the prints don't work, the transfers don't work, I just cut around the ink and I throw the paper back in the blender and I make more paper because, I've spent so much time getting to this point, I'm not going to waste a single thing. And yeah, so here are some of the final results. I'm really happy with how they turn out when they turn out. They feel very organic, and the shadow is on the paper, but it's also, if you see it up close, there's parts of it missing. So it's like it's on the paper, but it's also kind of barely there, which is kind of like also a metaphor, I think, for the whole subject matter. And I do like the finer paper, but I also like, the one on the right that has a deckled edge and it's frayed and it's just messy. It's just kind of like nature. And a couple more. You can see some more of my work on my website. I'll have a link at the end. And then I want to give a shout out to my husband because he made all the frames from reclaimed wood. He initially made 10 for the Japan show, but then he's now ended up making more than, like, I don't know, it's probably 80. So he doesn't know what he got himself into, because as far as I know, this project won't stop anytime soon. So I think the frames are even nicer than the artwork, so he elevated them a lot. So here's 2 more. And then getting back to Mackinac Island, I was disappointed that I didn't get to photograph an endangered plant species, but I felt like the project was somewhat redeemed because they had just cut a bunch of the invasive Norway maple trees on the island. And so my husband made this frame out of the maple, which I thought was so cool. And then I said, well, why don't we do that for all the prints and all the final prints that we make? And she said, no, that's a hard no. But it was fun. And yeah, this project's been so great. You know, I do workshops, exhibitions, presentations, and it's just been such a great way to connect with different groups of people. It's just in a variety of settings, and to be able to share the project it means a lot to me. And then just to bring this whole project full circle, you know, how I was talking about learning paper making from middle schoolers. A couple of years ago, I worked with a grad student from MSU, and we developed a curriculum for invasive and endangered plant species for middle schoolers. And so, you know, I did a presentation, and then their science and art teachers took them out to collect garlic mustard, and then they mixed it with construction paper, and they made sculptures. As you can see, they did a display at their school. And then afterwards, the teacher said that he had one boy in his class was usually quiet and just really not very engaged in the science class. But after this project, he was so excited about making paper. And I just thought, you know, that made me so happy, because I was inspired to do this, you know, paper making by middle school students. And then in the end, you know, I think I've inspired at least one middle school boy. So I thought that was pretty funny and pretty cool. And that's the thing that I love most about science and art projects, is just we can use them to inspire people that might have an interest in one or the other or neither, but we can use it to inspire each other. And I hope I've inspired you to try your hand at paper making. So I will stop there. I think we're out of time, but if you have questions, you can contact me through my website. And yeah, thank you again.